Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to another Monday night podcast. Tonight's podcast is going to be a continuation from last week's podcast about commas, and now we're up to commas part 2. Woohoo! So I want to review the rule that we talked about last week, and we also talked about last week in class. The rule with introductory clause and then comma independent clause. If you remember, we learned about the acronym of AWABIS. AWABISes were example of trigger words. Trigger words were words that let us know that we were introducing an introductory clause. These were examples of our trigger words: after, although, also, when, while, because, before, if, since, so. But we talked about how there could be other trigger words that aren't just AWABISes. But these were kind of like the main ones, and that if we saw a sentence that started with one of these trigger words, then we would know that there's going to be a comma later on in the sentence. We also talked about, though, when we talked about specifically about the word because, that this is the only instance where you can start a sentence with because, but you never, and I just, kind of was like putting this in here, you never put a comma right before or right after the word because. So just to review the rule, we have our trigger word. In this case, our trigger word is when. When the web is finished. The web is finished is our introductory clause. And we kind of are like, so what happens, when the web is finished? The spider has a place to live. This is the independent clause. This answers the first half of the sentence. Another sentence before, that's an example of our trigger word. Before players begin to play drills. What happens before players begin to play drills? They need to warm up properly. On a post-it, I would like you to please write an example of a sentence that follows this rule with a trigger, an introductory clause, and comma, and an independent clause. The new rule that many of you guys probably learned today in class is with a compound sentence. I always talk about how commas really can make our sentences sound so much more sophisticated, as opposed to just always having two choppy sentences. Commas enable us to combine sentences, and that is this rule. So two sentences, independent clauses, what I mean by that is that in theory that they are standalone sentences, very often short sentences, that we're able to join together using something called a coordinating conjunction, which we're going to get to. So let's take, for example, the sentences, I got dressed, I ate breakfast. In theory, those are two sentences that are correct. There's nothing wrong with them, but they're pretty much like second grade sentences. How can we make it into a sixth grade sentence? We can combine it, I got dressed, comma, adding what's called a coordinating conjunction, I ate breakfast. The second half of the sentence does not start with a capital letter, except in this case, because it's I, it does start with a capital letter. What are words that are coordinating conjunction that I can use to combine my two sentences? We have another acronym, and those are called fanboys. For, and, nor, but, or, yet, so are examples of coordinating conjunctions. If I use one of these words to combine my two sentences, I do my independent clause, comma, one of these words, and then I have my other independent clause. And this is our rule. Independent clause, comma, fanboys, independent clause. My comma always comes before the fanboys. So here's an example of a sentence. I was tired, so I went to sleep. I was tired, period. I went to sleep, period. Those are two sentences. I'm combining them with the fanboys. It's very important that on each side of the coordinating conjunction, it's a complete sentence. That's the only way this rule works. It was cold, comma, but I forgot to wear a coat. It was cold, I forgot to wear a coat. Those are both complete sentences. That's why I can combine it with a coordinating conjunction. Very important. Don't just use any coordinating conjunction just because. You need to make sure that your coordinating conjunction makes sense in the context of the sentence. So for example, I was tired, but I went to sleep. I kind of think so is a much better coordinating conjunction. It was cold, so I forgot to wear a coat. That doesn't really make any sense. It was cold, so I forgot to wear a coat. That makes a lot more sense. So just very important that you really just choose wisely. Homework tonight is skills pages, which you will find out on the whiteboard. This is Mrs. Kurtz signing off.